I called it Affirmation and Psychic Wholeness because I thought maybe that's the easiest and best approachable context and content in regards to Conrad Baars. And I would love to start with two quotes. And I know you guys love JP2 and you love Pastores Double Vobis. John Paul II says here, freedom therefore is essential to vocation, a freedom which, when it gives positive response, appears as a deep personal adherence, as a loving gift, or rather as a gift given back to the giver, who is God, who calls an oblation. So basically, what is the greatest goal for us as humans? What is the most mature act that we can ever perform is the total gift of self, right? And in Gaudium et Spes, that is a famous quote that John Paul II always in his theology of the body uses, where it says that I cannot find myself except through a sincere gift of self. And then I love when Bishop Cousins here connects that basically with affective maturity. He says, affective maturity means that the man is free to give himself as a gift, which depends on interior freedom. The freedom for sacrifice is the remote goal, but affective maturity is the proximate goal. Affective maturity is the necessary foundation for this freedom to exist. So I think maybe that's the shortest, most precise definition of what affective maturity is and what is the goal kind of affective maturity. The goal is that we are free to give ourselves as a gift, right? In marriage, as a priest, or maybe even, I don't know, a white martyrdom or a red martyrdom when God wills it, that we are able to give witness in the most extreme version, right? To give ourselves to God back as He has given Himself to us. Affective maturity is developing our heart, and how one allows your own heart to be informing, to basically inform your mind and reason, and therefore to affirm and to love other people most authentically. So the development of the heart informs mind and reason, and then the whole person wills the good. I do not only will the good with my mind, but I also desire the good with my heart. So that's basically wholeness that is expressed in emotional maturity. All right. I get out of this.
Yeah. Before you go on, I want to just share something, just landing the plane. Jeff probably didn't see this yet, but we are coaching an executive of a company, probably 80 or $100 million a year. And he asked Jeff, how do I elevate my project managers? It's a construction company. And I sent him a video today, and I said to him, if we want them to perform at the highest possible level for their customers, let's teach them how to become self-gift for the sake of their customers. And our whole person leadership coaching, the outcome, we believe, is self-awareness, self-mastery, and self-gift. Self-awareness, self-mastery, and self-gift.
Yeah, beautiful. Praise God. Yeah, that's and also Conrad Baars, right? He almost quit his psychiatrist job. Like he almost changed specialties because he felt he cannot help anybody in this context of secular psychiatry or psychology until he encountered the writings of Dr. Anna Terwoower. And Anna Terwoower started to connect her psychology with the anthropology of St. Thomas Aquinas. And basically that put Conrad Baars on a complete new journey, which he was basically on for the rest of his life. And yeah, he also said, like similar what you say sometimes, that the profession of psychology has its weaknesses for sure. And let's just read Conrad Baars here what he says, because I found that just very very beautiful, and it really made me think a lot. I have that from the book Psychic Wholeness and Healing. And it's just introduction in the preface where he says, "It is reasonable to assume that psychiatrists and others who like to call themselves mental health professionals, when in a reflective mood, must be painfully aware of the irony that there exists no truly satisfactory definition of mental health. How many of them realize that there cannot be such a definition unless the spiritual dimension were included? Yet, if serious consideration were given to existence and role of the spiritual powers of man, the profession would possess a clearer diagnostic criterion and a therapeutic goal to aid in promoting what then would be better called psychic wholeness." So when he talks about psychic wholeness, it means psychological wholeness, right? I mean, the word psychic is unfortunately used a lot in occult and New Age circles, but that's not what he means here. Psychic wholeness is truly like an integration of emotions with intellect and will, with the body, with the spirit, with the soul, like the whole human person. And he describes what mental health basically looks like. And I would like to read to you, like we have with the definitions of John Paul II and Bishop Cousins, I have given basically what is the goal, right? Where we're aiming towards. And now I would like to read to you from Healing Your Emotions, also from Conrad Baars, a very beautiful analogy of an interaction between a horse and the rider, whereas the horse is basically the emotional life and the rider is reason and intellect. And the way how they grow together is either healthy, like mental health in a positive way, or it describes more what the whole psychiatry discipline does since decades, looking at the pathology, right? All right, in the first example, there's a little girl with the horse. So that's the psychic wholeness process example, okay? And then we look at a second example. Okay. The girl can hardly wait for the little colt to grow up so she can ride it. But she must wait for 3 years or so before the colt is strong enough. In the meantime, she spends many hours with the horse, watching it play and run around, discovering itself and the world. She feeds it regularly, brushes its coat, and patiently leads it by a rope around its neck. Thus, they get to know each other, their likes and dislikes, temperaments, and other characteristics. They learn to respect and trust each other. When at last the time comes to train the young horse, the girl must learn this rather arduous and involved process from an experienced trainer. She is fortunate to find the best one in the business. She soon discovers it takes time and patience to teach the horse, to go through its paces, to know what commands to give, how to bridle and saddle it, and many more things. The horse in the beginning tries to have its own way, refuses to obey, resists doing things that do not come naturally, yet responds little by little to the girl's gentle yet firm insistence to make him do what she wants. Whenever the girl loses her temper and hits the horse, things get worse and the horse shows signs of obstinacy. The next day, the girl finds it harder to catch the horse in the meadow. She has to be especially kind to regain the trust and cooperation of the horse. Both girl and horse, however, learn from their mistakes, and in time, what was a struggle and perhaps looked at times like a battle between girl and horse becomes more and more a cooperative effort. After several years, when the girl has grown into a young woman and the colt has become fully grown and strong, everything goes smoothly because they respect and listen to each other. The young woman has learned to mount the horse as soon as she has fallen off. The horse no longer shies and rears as often as it did at first. while the young woman has learned to remain in the saddle when it does. So that's basically a process that describes how the emotional life slowly matures with our intellect, right? That they grow naturally together. And in this case, wherever the woman wants to ride, right, the emotions follow and support the will. Like there is a heresy which is called voluntarism, right? The more I want something, the more I will things, and the harder it is to practice virtue, the more virtuous it is, kind of. But that's not what Thomas Aquinas teaches. He's actually saying, no, if you want the thing that is good and you also desire it with your heart, then the virtue is perfect, right? So wanting the good with your will and desiring the good with your heart, that's basically the goal. And even if that would mean that we have to sacrifice something. Okay, let's quickly look at the second horse rider analogy that basically shows the opposite. Compare this picture of healthy growth and integration with that of a man who has always been afraid of horses, but who had to learn to ride one as his transportation depended on it. He had never fed the horse well in the belief that a weak horse would be easier to control. He had been most irregular in learning to ride it, for his fear of accidents had always been great. The more he pulled on the reins to keep the horse from going too fast, the harder it became to control it. Falls became more frequent as time went on. As the horse grew weaker and thinner from being underfed, the harder the man had to work to make it go where he wanted. He had to beat it with a whip to make it go faster, until at last the horse was no longer able to carry its rider. One day it lay down and died. The man had become exhausted from all his efforts to do things his way. He became seriously depressed with the realization that he had failed to train his horse in the way he had always thought was best. All right, that's basically a development of emotions that went wrong, like maybe out of emotional deprivation because I was never affirmed. And now we basically go into the whole topic of affirmation, because what does it need for a little child to be supported in that natural, healthy development of emotional intelligence basically is affirmation. And that's what Pat asked me today to basically go into. Yes, Pat.
So I love the story. I think I heard another coach, a trainer, present it as the elephant rider, trying to ride an elephant, the elephant trainer and rider. I love that analogy. So what you're saying in the second scenario, help me understand. So the lack of affirmation, the lack of love, the lack of affirmation caused that horse to just not function, not flourish, basically.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
Lack of affirmation and deprivation as well, right?
Yes. That's why Conrad Baars basically developed the emotional deprivation disorder. And that's oftentimes on the basis of many other mental health issues. I think he talks here about such a fundamental thing that we all need.
Yeah.
The children, the teenagers, even as adults, we all need that kind of affirmation for each other.
Yeah, I'm gonna just periodically sprinkle into this just some of the stuff we learned with HFC, because I think if anybody else, any of our other coaches watch this, I want them to have this context. But Joe Kavanaugh, who's really I would call the grandfather of Human Formation Coalition, because he really was my mentor, trainer, and coach and teacher. Big Conrad Baars fan. He was huge on affirmation. Huge on affirmation. When I look at what like the coaches in Lisa Miladnich's CCC and other places, the coaches that are trained in strengths, even Matt and Aaron Ingold, the coaches that are trained in strengths, in my opinion, are so much more effective than coaches that aren't. And I just, before this call, I was practice coaching parts work on a woman who's a coach we train, very good. And because we were able to use the strengths-based language, it created an environment of affirmation and positivity about how these parts, when they're not overused, could be super helpful.
Yeah.
So just really I'm seeing a lot of alignment around this affirmation and what is part of our DNA at HFC, because that's DNA that Joe left as an imprint on me and then the organization. Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean, I love the strength approach because that is way more affirming than any other temperament test that show a lot of weaknesses or maybe even pathology, right? We want to look at the strength. But what's also very interesting is there are, like Sue Baars teaches about 4 different ways of affirming somebody. So there is the emotional affirmation, which we are talking mainly about today. But then there is an intellectual affirmation where I tell somebody the truth about things, right? There is a moral affirmation where I tell somebody what is right and wrong. And then there is a spiritual affirmation where I basically help somebody increase and grow in their relationship with God. So by what we are talking here today is basically only the emotional aspect of affirmation. Because the emotional aspect of affirmation is more being than doing. That's so interesting. And I will get to that in a second. But maybe before we go there, I want to quote once more Conrad Baars here. When he talks about psychic birth or psychological birth, he says, and that's in Born Only Once, biological birth is not enough. Psychic birth through authentic affirmation is an absolute necessity for one to be capable of finding true human happiness in this life. They're not yet affirmed needed, like infants and children and persons with emotional deprivation disorder. They're not yet completely affirmed needed, like adolescents or young adults. And the mature adults too needs the words of affirmation. Affirmation is at the root of all happy human existence.
Let me stop you there.
Mm-hmm.
I love these 4 dimensions of affirmation: emotional affirmation, intellectual affirmation, moral affirmation, and spiritual affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see those 4 mapping to the 4 dimensions of formation?
What are the 4 dimensions?
So emotional in Pastor Esteban, emotional would be maybe related to the human formation. Intellectual, obviously, intellectual formation. Moral formation, maybe doing rather than being. Maybe that's the pastoral dimension. And then spiritual formation aligned with spiritual formation. Does that make sense? Do you see a map?
Yes, I think it makes sense. However, I think that the emotional formation is at the root, like at the basis of all the others.
Just like human formation, just like in Pastor Esteban 43, Pope John Paul talks about human formation as being the basis of the other 4 pillars, or the other 3 pillars.
Yeah.
So emotional as human, intellectual as intellectual, moral as pastoral / vocational pillar, and then spiritual affirmation as spiritual pillar.
Yes. I think that would make sense. Yeah, I love it. All right, so then let's dive into like what is affirmation, right? And I'm talking about the emotional aspect. What is emotional affirmation? And I read another very short story from Born Only Once that Conrad Baars uses here. And he writes, he was 5 or 6 years old when, on a weekday morning, the pastor came to visit his mother. His father was outside working on the farm. The older children were in school. Being shy, my friend John hid under the table, but not entirely out of sight, while the pastor and his mother visited. Neither one paid attention to him. When the pastor had left and John had come out from under the table, his mother stroked his hair and with a friendly smile said, "Were you shy, Johnny?" Johnny had never forgotten this incident and the wonderful feeling that it was all right for him to be shy, that he did not have to force himself to be a big boy and to hide his shyness from the visitor. Johnny had been affirmed both by his mother and her understanding visitor. They had affirmed Johnny by allowing him to grow and become who and what he was supposed to be in his own time, in his own way, and at his own pace. I remember asking John whether he recalled the effect of this particular visit. "Indeed," he replied. "I remember that it gave me a sense of confidence in myself, a feeling that I was okay, and I am almost positive that the visit cured or at least greatly diminished my shyness." This may sound like a rather unexpected outcome to those of us who find it easier to imagine another version of this visit by the pastor, like, "Johnny, come out from under the table and shake hands with the pastor. Show him what a big boy you are. Come on, Johnny. Don't be a baby." But it is precisely the Johnny in this second version who is not being affirmed and whose emotional development will become adversely affected. So what the mother basically did was she received Johnny in a way that was totally accepting and affirming to the boy, right? There was no concept about Johnny, how he has to behave or how he has to even be or become. She just really received Johnny in the way he was in his emotional state and allowed him to be and affirmed him in this. So that's a beautiful example basically on emotional affirmation. All right. Do you guys have any questions so far or input?
I was just sitting here thinking about, creation. God said every time, and he saw that it was good. So, the very first action that we have as human beings being created by God is we are good. So right there, affirmation, right at the beginning of the Bible, affirmation is needed.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful.
Terry, Tim, and I talk a lot about, so Terry's Protestant, and we talk a lot about this, I don't know what the Protestants call it, total depravity. And Terry says, what I like about the Catholics is they honor original goodness. Because I guess in a lot of the Protestant circles, they just have a different perspective on that. So just interesting.
Okay. So Sue Baars Sue Baars is the daughter of Conrad Baars, and she oftentimes uses the words affirming living and affirming presence like interchangeably with affirmation itself. So it's basically a whole lifestyle. And affirming living or affirming presence requires openness. That's the main first criterion, openness to whatever is around me, the goodness that is around myself. And also, openness requires that first I must be myself, or your first must be yourself. And in order to be myself, I must first become myself. And in order to become myself, I first must receive myself as a gift. And that is so beautiful, right? Like I receive myself as a gift, number one, from God. But in this beautiful example with the mother that we just heard, Johnny was able to receive himself from his mother and without criticism, without you are somehow wrong, you have to be different, but just receive yourself as a gift from your mom or your dad in the way you are. So, and that's different of many modalities in therapy or maybe coaching where people think that they can kind of save themselves, right? I mean, I love the parts work. I mean, I'm doing the Bonnie Weiss class right now, and there are many things that I really love about parts work. It's amazing. But the theory itself, like how the self interacts with the parts, and that the self kind of like is the healing thing that brings healing to the parts. And if that is detached from God or from other human beings, that it becomes completely, I don't know, a theory of self-salvation kind of. And of course,
Amen.
that's not true. I mean, we need each other, and we of course need God to be able to receive ourselves as a gift.
Yeah, amen. You know, what really convinced me with it, I watched the video for 8 minutes that convinced me that I needed to pay attention to parts work, because when I saw the explanation of IFS, and I've always said that a good coach holds the space for image bearing, helping people bear the image of God. And with parts work, I just kind of intuitively saw that this, what Dick Schwartz called self, was the God image inside the person.
Yeah.
So the Catholic perspective on parts work is that the inmost self is the God image, is the intermediary between the parts and God. And what I love about what you're putting here in these first 3 bullets is receiving the gift of yourself. And I see it again and again. And Dr. Peter Malinowski talks about this too. And it just really hits home with me. And when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, the ability to love yourself is the upward bound of loving your neighbor. So if we don't see ourselves as gift and we don't love ourselves well, it's very difficult to affirm. And I was just on a coaching call with somebody who deals with a situation in the organization where there's jealousy against her, insecurity, throwing this person I just coached under the bus. And I said to this person I coached, I said, I wonder what happened in her life, what kind of lack of affirmation happened in her life that she feels like she needs to compete with you and throw you under the bus.
Yeah. I think that's what we can see often in emotionally deprived persons. They can be like amazingly successful in other parts, like in business or whatever it is, or sports. But in their emotional life, they can be like little boys or little girls. And there's lacking like big time social mature interaction. It's very interesting, because the emotional deprivation is then compensated with success, kind of, right?
Yeah.
And I try to give that affirmation to myself with that success. Yeah, by showing the world how successful I am, the way I feed my own affirmation, and I don't know. And of course, that is a futile.
Yeah,
it's a cute try. Basically, it does not really work.
Yeah, that's my story. But by the grace of God, it's no longer my story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing, Pat. Praise God. Okay, with the next point, right? In order to receive myself as a gift, there has to be another one who gives without taking, without demanding anything, who gives you what is not his own, but yours, your own goodness. So affirmation is like a mirror that shows your own goodness to yourself. And the other person can only do this when they are already happy with themselves and thus open to the goodness of all else. I think, yeah, that's just so deep and so beautiful. And of course, that's if we read that here, right, how affirming living has all these steps, or that first step of openness, we already can see here that's a lifelong journey, right? It's like when Jesus says, love your neighbors as I have loved you. I mean, we never stop learning what that actually means. This is a lifelong journey. And I think the same is true with affirmation. Yeah. All right. Affirmation is a way of being. So how you are with another person, it's an attitude towards others. It is a way of being present to another person, to nature, to anything around you that you find as good. And it's not so much what you do or what you do to or what you do for another person. So affirmation is being, not doing. That's the emotional affirmation part, right? When we come to the intellectual, moral, or spiritual affirmation, I guess that's when we step into the realm of doing something. But the basis that's underneath all of the other forms of affirmation is really, I allow myself to be with you, and I allow myself to be moved by you. And when I'm moved by you, over time, I also express that maybe with my facial expression or with my tone of voice or with my whole gesture. You see that I'm moved by you, and that affirms you. So that's what it actually means. It's more like being and not necessarily I have to do something here. So the 3 steps process is number 1, being present, attentive, open, receptive to another person. And over time, I allow myself to be moved and even spontaneously, right? That can be very spontaneous that I'm excited about something. And feelings will arise naturally. I don't have to do anything. Like there is sympathy or liking or empathy, compassion. I'm moved by that. That's step number 2. And St. Thomas will call these emotions the humane emotions or the concupiscible appetite. We can talk about that whole anthropology maybe in next sessions. Today I wanted to just focus on affirmation, but desire, love, and joy are the humane emotions, and usually they are kind of triggered or stirred up in us if we meditate. It can be even maybe a picture in a museum, right? I'm sitting in front of an amazing, I don't know, Mona Lisa in the Louvre in Paris, and I'm just sitting in front of the picture, and all of a sudden I feel I move to tears, and I cannot explain it. I'm just moved to tears, right? That's what happens here with our humane emotions by being affirming to my surroundings. Okay, and then as a 3rd step, allow these feelings which have been aroused. I allow that to be revealed to the other person. As I already said, maybe to my countenance, to my facial expression, to my voice, to the choice of words. And in this way, again, I'm acting as a mirror to the goodness of that person and their worth. And that is very different than listing like accomplishments or encourage someone, even though that has a lot of value in itself, right? If we say we list accomplishments or we encourage that person with everything they did or suffered through or whatever it is, I think that would be maybe intellectual affirmation, or maybe, yeah, can also be moral or spiritual affirmation, listing accomplishments, or yeah, exactly. But that's basically that builds, if I could do that together, right? If I give first that human person, that presence, that time to just be with you and allow myself, my heart to be moved by you, and the person receives that from me. And maybe then I can list encouragements. If those 2 things get together, right? Can you see how powerful that can be?
Yeah.
To a person?
A thought that's coming to mind is like in my early relationship with Pat, like Pat looked at my strengths results and affirmed something in me that like I didn't even really believe at the emotional level, but his emotional assurance in me and what was within me made me believe in what was within me. And then Pat gave me places to exercise it. And I got affirmation from others and from Pat. And that really helped me to claim a part of me that was never part of my identity.
Yeah.
But then it led to me living authentically. Yeah.
So think, Jeff, about how a mere $30, $40 assessment tool, Clifton Strengths, and 2 hours of coaching was just pivotal in your life with some affirmation. Gets back to our point about the, as Joe Kavanaugh would say, the catalytic power of the Clifton Strengths tool. I mean, there's other tools, but that's the one that we use, obviously. So really paves the way for affirmation. So my takeaway so far, you know, I've never really thought much about affirmation, honestly, until today. But we do it, I do it, but I'm just now more dialed in and attuned to some of the brain science behind it.
It's basically you receive that other person freely without any expectations in the beginning, and that gives that person complete freedom to grow in its own pace, in its own style, like complete freedom, right? It's just beautiful.
Yeah. And
So
that's why on our compass for our whole person leadership coaching process, strengths, it's so important to have strengths, M code, APEST, those affirming tools as the foundational piece of the whole process when we coach the whole person.
Yeah. Yeah. I think these tools in themselves are kind of affirming because they show you the positive sides of yourself.
Yeah.
And these positive sides can have shadow sides, but you don't look at the pathology in the first place. You look at what makes you truly strong or beautiful and the strength. Yeah. All right. So what are the effects of affirmation? So it strengthens the other person by revealing their goodness and worth to them. I mean, just what we just spoke and how we gave testimony to each other. And this again, this constitutes what Conrad Baars calls the psychological psychic birth. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Like if you see maybe some stories of criminals on TV or whatever, if they have never received that psychological birth in their childhood, never been truly affirmed as who they really are and how they are in this world, I think that kicks in a lot of anger towards that person of refusing that psychological birth to me, right? But we see it in one of the next slides that criticism is basically, it's basically killing criticism is one of the opposites of affirmation. It's kind of like denying that person to be what that person is. So the next point is affirmation allows the other to be as they are before changing or doing anything for that person, right? This way, they may experience themselves and their own feelings, and so may develop a repertoire of feelings and emotions as a part of themselves. So what we also learn in the parts work, right, with IFS, to integrate the parts in the true self. If we are affirmed as little children more and more by parents or surrounding people, then I think that integration of self with the parts is way more naturally, and then we don't need as much healing later on. So, and over time, affirmation helps develop the pleasure emotions. Conrad Baars calls it the humane emotions. And what I put here in the parentheses, concupiscible appetite, that's how St. Thomas Aquinas called it in the Summa. And these, the concupiscible appetite, the humane emotions are love, desire, and joy. So, and now we can understand that these three emotions together and affirmation becomes the source of experiencing happiness. Okay, and again, we have to receive it from others first before we can give that to ourselves. Or I don't know how much, what is the extent we could give that to ourselves. I mean, in prayer, I guess we can connect with God and receive it from God, but there's always this psychological birth. We have to receive it from another. We cannot give it to ourselves. Affirmation is not. So I think that also helps to understand the whole concept better. So in this context, and we speak about emotional affirmation here, right? it is not helpful motivational phrases, even though they can be extremely helpful, right? Like Sue Baars taught me through her talks, she taught me one very helpful motivational phrase, which is if something goes wrong, which is out of your control, you just say to yourself, oh, well, right, that's how it is. Okay, oh, well. And that helpful motivational phrase, that affirmation kind of really helps to accept the situation that it is. But that's not what is meant with emotional affirmation. That's something different. That's just what we just heard, like it's more being and being receptive to just be with the person. It is not something you do to or for another person, however positive or beneficial those actions might be. It's not trying to make another person better or to try to help the other person or evangelize. And it's also not trying to be the best version of yourself or trying to make the other person the best version of themselves. Again, I think all of these other things that we have mentioned here have their value in the other areas of intellectual or moral or spiritual affirmation, but it's not the basis of what emotional affirmation is.
I understand that. That makes sense, but give me a little more, help me understand why these are not the basis of emotional intelligence.
I mean, emotional intelligence is, I think, a product, a consequence of affirmation. And emotional affirmation, if we go back to the slide, right, to maybe to this slide, it's a way of being.
Got you, not doing.
It's not a way of doing something. And being with somebody, I allow my humane emotions. I mean, there are a second type of emotions. Aquinas calls them the irascible appetite, or Conrad Baars calls them assertive emotions. The assertive emotions really help us to do something. But the humane emotions, like the example I have given in a museum, and you look at a picture and all of a sudden you feel something, you are moved. That's what, and if I have that in relationship to a real person and I allow myself to be moved, and then over time I express that I'm moved, then that is truly affirming to the person.
Yeah.
So everything that comes afterwards, like the doing, like everything that's put here, like the motivational phases or the evangelization or the helping or making somebody helping to be a better person, all of that has value in itself, but it's not the basis.
Right. That makes total sense. So really that would be, so like not trying to be the best version of yourself or trying to make somebody else be the best version of themselves. That would not be the emotional affirmation. That would be maybe more of the moral or intellectual potentially.
Yes.
Because I will have those conversations with people. I don't necessarily use that language, but I'll use the language of, we talk about, matter of fact, this is what I used with this gentleman today that I sent the video to about elevating his team. I said, you know, my definition of leadership right now in my headspace is self-gift with boundaries.
Yes.
You know, so the best version of yourself is really self-gift within the boundaries of, say, the organization in my typical context.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Honestly, I don't want to take away from this lesson, but this is explaining to me so much me, because I have a high sense of moral, spiritual, and intellectual affirmation, but being that I was never affirmed with my deafness as a child, in other words, the deafness was a shameful thing. I was never affirmed, and what I actually have is why I struggle in the emotional and mental space with some of the things that I struggle with because I can't never being a phone now, I have a hard time loving myself though. Does that make sense? And so this is pure gold for my journey forward because I have to find people, actually like you, I've already found them, that give me the affirmation I need, even though I'm not recognizing it as such up until now.
Wow.
Wow, that's profound.
Thank you for sharing, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I also remember like one of the most affirming persons in my life was my spiritual father in Austria, Father Bernhard Wojcicki. He is just, yeah. And maybe that if I explain that how he treated me and how that's the way how he treats like almost everybody, he's just very saintly person. It's like, of course, he does a lot of things. He prays with you, he hears your confession, he does deliverance prayers on all these kinds of things, right? But before he does all these things, and it just blows me so away when I'm with that person, because I get the feeling I am the only one person that truly matters in this world to him right now.
Mhm,
It's just, whoa. I mean, that's on the basis, right?
mhm,
Immediately when you step in his like presence, you feel you truly matter right now. And of course he does the prayers, he does all the other things afterwards or at the same time, but you truly feel so much affirmed only by being in his presence because you just feel that he loves you and you feel that you're the only thing that matters to him right now.
mhm.
This is so amazing. He is the most affirming person on this emotional level that I have ever encountered in my life. It's
Yeah.
just amazing. All right. What is the opposite of affirmation? It is denial. It is giving advice before we have even heard the person out, right? It is denying their feelings or thoughts or what they feel or think is important. Like we live in a very emotionally dismissive society, right? When little children are angry or when they're sad or crying, many times we hear the parents telling them, don't be angry, right? Behave. Or, I mean, maybe in some social context that makes sense to do that, right? I guess in some circumstances we have to do that. But I hope there's also the other part that we allow the emotions of our children to just be what they are and see that emotion as a moment of maybe being intimate with them emotionally and just being with them.
I will tell you, when I look at this list, that is how I led in my organization for so many years. You know, giving advice before I heard what they had to say, denying their feelings or thoughts, dismissing them, only interacting when I want something from them. That happens a lot when you have a lot of employees. Giving a pat on the back when I mean, this describes exactly how I would show up so often as a leader in my previous life. So thank you for sharing this.
Thank you for sharing, Pat, for your openness and showing your vulnerability to us. Yeah, all right. Then thank you so much for being with me and in this book study of Conrad Baars.